It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the films of December 15th, 1995. We got 5 movies to look at today, so let's just get right into it. And we're going to start off with, we actually have a pretty good week of movies. We have some notable movies on this particular show to look at. And we're going to start off with the biggest new release of the weekend, and that is Robin Williams and the fantasy adventure, Jumanji.
First. Jumanji is more than a game. It's a new adventure. Just give me the dice. Every time, you roll the dice. Jumanji is coming. Robin Williams. Jumanji.
I'm not going to lie to you. I was never a fan of the original Jumanji. I know everybody considers this to be one of Robin Williams' classic movies. This is right up there with, for a lot of people, with Mrs. Doubtfire and Good Morning Vietnam and all these great movies he did back then. But me personally, I just never was really into into that first movie. I never was into it. It scared me as a little kid seeing the trailers for this, and I just had no intention of ever watching this movie. But when I finally did, I just never really got anything out of it, and I think I could tell you why that is. The concept is not bad. It's based off of a best-selling book by Chris Van Allsburg, who would also be the writer of The Polar Express and also would write Othello, which is a spin-off of Jumanji. But the thing that really strikes me right off the bat, looking for the clips for this again, is that the visual effects of this movie, for the most part, really do not stay up. This is a movie that's almost 30 years old, and the effects for this movie look abysmal at points. Like, you could just tell that these visuals were not up to speed, and they couldn't and it's amazing how Sony hasn't found a way to up the visual effects when they put this out on 4K or Blu-ray, because you're putting it into a higher definition. And is that really the best you could do on that front? And that's one of the reasons why a lot of the special effects in this movie really do not hold up well at all. The visual effects, at least, really do not hold up well. They really do seem dated. Some of the practical effects I'll give them credit for do still hold up. There are some elements in there that I do think are very interesting. And I do think that there is more to this movie than I would say I really don't like about it. I do like this idea. I do like this concept of having these people playing this board game that releases these things from the jungle every time you take a turn. And I also like the scenes where Robin Williams and Bonnie Hunt, knowing what they have been through in the past, is when they have to play this again, their first reaction is just like, they have this tension, they have this tense nerve inside of them that, like, what the hell's going to happen here? And it's just like those moments do work pretty well, but after a while, the movie does get kind of repetitive. I mean, it does get kind of, so it's the same thing over and over again. The humor isn't really all that funny. The acting, everyone's doing the best they can in terms of the acting. I do like that there's a little bit of a message there at the end, and I do like the way the movie ends. It's that stuff in the middle, however, that just seems like, let's just keep doing this stuff over and over again. Let's not really have that much of a premise to work off of with that. And it's a fun premise to work off of, honestly. But I just didn't think the script for this movie was as strong as they could have had. And like I said, the visual effects get really unnerving after a while. But I mean, honestly, but despite the fact that I really don't like this movie, I really do like the Jumanji franchise as a whole. Like, I remember watching the TV series when it was on UPN in the late 90s. I do remember seeing the spin-off film, the one directed by Jon Favreau, and thinking that was actually kind of a decent film. And I've really liked the other two Jumanji movies, The Welcome to the Jungle and The Next Level. I like what they did with that concept, and they actually did something new and creative with it that I think works very well. I think those are two very good movies. And to me personally, those are the ones I really like out of this series the most. But the first film, I'm one of those few people that really don't like it. I really did not care for it when it first was coming out, and even after I got a chance to see it, I freely admit that I did not think the movie was all that great. I still try to get into it every once in a while, but it's just not there, at least in that first movie. Like I said, I think the other movies in the series work a whole lot better. At least that's my opinion. I know everybody really likes this movie. I know they put it up there highly with Robin Williams' work, but just me personally, I was never a big fan of this movie, and I can tell you right now, I'm one of the few people that actually probably thinks that, because I know this first movie has a huge fan base, and more power to you, but that's the power of freedom of speech and the power of having your opinion out there. You can say whatever you want, and that's just the way you have to think about it at some points, and so on and so forth. So I'm just dragging this on and on as we go. Okay. So anyway, now that I'm done with that, let's Jumanji. Let's move on to the next movie that we have here, and that is Michael Mann's Heat, starring Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Val Kilmer.
He's here. I can feel it.
You search for the scent of your prey, and then you hunt them down. That's the only thing you're committed to.
It keeps me sharp, on the edge, where I gotta be. You want to be making moves on the street? Allow nothing to be in your life that you cannot walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner.
No, my life's a disaster zone because I spend all my time chasing guys like you around the block.
I do what I do best. I take scores. You do what you do best. Trying to stop guys like me.
You've been walking through our life dead.
All I am is what I'm going after. If I'm there and I gotta put you away, I won't like it. But I'll tell you, you are going down. What if you do got me boxed in? I gotta put you down. Because no matter what, you will not get in my way. I will not hesitate for a second. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer in a Michael Mann film. Heat.
Pay no attention to the fact that Al Pacino and Robert De Niro only have one scene together in this entire movie. Yeah, that's one of the things that they really sold the movie on. They basically sold us as see two of the greatest living actors in this movie to get back to back, and even though they're only in it for really 2 scenes altogether, and we'll delve more into that in just a moment. But this is Michael Mann's Heat, and though he was well known previously from Manhunter and Last of the Mohicans, I think this is the one that really put his name on the map as a director. Michael Mann, I should say. He really did make one of the best crime capers ever with this movie. I mean, the action in this movie is some of the best action that you will ever see to film. The sequences are so stylized, they're very tension-filled, they're amazingly done. I mean, the armed robbery scene alone, I think, is more than worth the price of admission. And, the acting overall is really good. You get, like I said, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, they're great in this. They have really good performances. But, you promise to have 2 of the greatest living actors of the time on screen together. Give them more than 2 scenes. Like, there's only 2 scenes in particular where they actually have a scene. There's a scene in the restaurant, and then there's the scene towards the end of the movie, and even towards the climax of the movie, it's not really them together. It's like really, it's a little bit of a flaw, but because the rest of the movie is so good, you kind of just let it slide because the rest of the movie has been so damn good up to this point. I mean, but still, the trailers say that the 2 actors are going to collide, and really, they only do it twice in the movie, but they would pair up again in Righteous Kill, which was a decent film, not that great, and then they later would meet up again in The Irishman, which was a far superior film. But the rest of the acting overall is very good here. Val Kilmer, the late Tom Sizemore, John Voight, Ashley Judd, McLetty Williamson, Amy Brenneman, Wes Studi, Hank Azaria, Natalie Portman, William Fichtner, Ted Levine, Dennis Haysbert. A lot of notable names in this movie. I mean, there's just so much about this movie that works. It's amazing. The action is good. The action is great, I should say. The acting is really good. The story works. The pacing is surprisingly good for a movie that's over 3 hours long. It's just a damn good movie. It's one of the definitive action classics. And really, you should go and check this movie out if you haven't seen it already. Also, one more thing I'd like to point out is that Heat is one of those interesting movies where nearly every single studio has had the releasing rights to this particular film, and you'll see what I mean in just a second. So the movie was released by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers put the first video out for it, the first DVD release out of it, and then the entire Regency Enterprises library was sold to 20th Century Fox. 20th Century, Regency Enterprises, a lot of the movies that Warner Brothers had worked on with them went over to Fox, and then they later paired up with Paramount Pictures for the Paramount's home entertainment library that brief time when Paramount and Warner Brothers were putting movies out together, and it was released alongside the Ultimate Gangsters collection with contemporary classics like Mean Streets, The Untouchables, Goodfellas, and The Departed. most of those movies were Warner Brothers movies, but again, that was that time when Paramount and Warner Brothers were putting out movies together. And then recently, you just had Disney, who essentially picked up all the Regency movies from Fox because they bought the Fox library, and they recently put that on in 4K. So it's a weird thing. Like, you're almost waiting for Universal and Lionsgate to eventually get the rights to this, so the trifecta can continue. But I just thought that was very weird and interesting that a film that started off being released by Warner Brothers went to Fox because of because they bought the library of the Regency Enterprises. Briefly was at Paramount, and now is owned by Disney. It's just a weird situation. I think is very intriguing, but like I said, Heat is bottom line is Heat is an amazing movie. I thought I wanted to bring that little tidbit up for you, but yeah, like I said, if you haven't seen Heat already, you might as well go and see it because you do yourself a huge disservice by not doing so. So, anyway, let's move on to the next movie, and that is the remake of Sabrina.
Season, Harrison Ford is at his best. He puts the sparkle back into romance.
I never thought of you as the dancer.
Call me Bojangles at the office.
Julia Ormond is absolutely dazzling.
She's terrific.
Siskel and Ebert give Sabrina 2 very enthusiastic thumbs up.
I need her. I don't need anything.
Harrison Ford, Julia Ormond.
What was he like as a child?
Shorter.
Sabrina, rated PG, starts Friday, December 15th.
So this is essentially a remake of the 1954 Billy Wilder film, which starred Audrey Hepburn and William Holden. And as you see, Harrison Ford is playing the William Holden character, and Julia Ormond is playing the title character as well. And it also stars Greg Kinnear in what would be his first starring film role in the movie. And, of course, Greg Kinnear at this point was best known for his work on Talk Soup, and later he was actually considered to be a contender for the late-night position whenever David Letterman left, but he essentially left late night to focus on a film career, and it actually worked out pretty well for him because within a couple of years he was nominated for an Oscar for As Good as It Gets, and he's turned out to be a pretty good actor. And this is a movie where for his his film debut, it's a pretty good job. Like, I think he does work very well next to Harrison Ford and Julia Ormond. The movie overall is really enjoyable. It's directed by Sidney Pollack, but it was mostly seen as a disappointment critically and financially. Not even critically, but financially it was a disappointment. But it got positive reviews, but compared to the other movie, the original Sabrina, it was definitely seen as a letdown. But I think it was a pretty good movie. I think it was a good modernization of this movie, which would be very hard to do for the time period. But I thought they did a pretty good job with it. I like that Harrison Ford plays a role that we're not used to seeing him do that often. I think that's a very unique performance for him. And the chemistry between him and Julia Ormond works pretty well here, as well as Greg Kinnear and Ormond. And you also have Angie Dickinson, Richard Crenna, John Wood, Lauren Holly, Dana Ivy in this. A pretty good cast overall. A lot of elements of this movie do work. Does it work all the way through? Not really. It's kind of a mediocre film for the... I won't even go that far as to say that, like, it's hard to compare this to the original movie. It's definitely a step down, but on its own, I think it does a pretty good job of modernizing the story and making it work for what it is. I would highly recommend checking out Sabrina if you haven't seen it already, just to see a different Harrison Ford than you're used to seeing, because this is a really good performance from him that feels very different from what we're used to seeing him. So that's Sabrina. Let's move on to the next movie, and that is Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility.
One motion picture will bring you all the surprises that life and love can offer.
You are the loveliest girls I ever set eyes on. Can you not get them married, Mrs. Dashwood?
Marianne and Eleanor, as different as two sisters can be.
Do you love him? I do not attempt to deny that I think very highly of him, that I greatly esteem him.
Esteem him? Like him?
Eleanor is not like you or me, dear. She does not like to be swayed by her emotions.
Columbia Pictures invites you
The more I know of the world, the more I am convinced that I shall never see a man whom I can truly love.
to fall deeply
Marianne, you must change. You will catch a cold. What care I for colds when there is such a man?
You will care very much when your nose swells up.
You are right. Help me, Eleanor.
from Jane Austen's timeless classic.
There's some blue sky. Let us chase it.
Comes a motion picture beyond all expectations. Academy Award winner Emma Thompson, Alan Rickman, Kate Winslet, and Hugh Grant. Sense and Sensibility.
Obviously, this is based off of Jane Austen's novel, and you have a lot of interesting elements here. You've got a fairly young group of people involved in this movie. Ang Lee had not become a household name up until this movie, and he was picked because of his work that he did in China with The Wedding Banquet. And from the producer of this movie, she actually went to him to bring him in here to appeal to a wider audience, and it really turned his career around, because he not only made a hit movie, he got nominated for several Oscars, including Best Director, I believe, or maybe he didn't get nominated for Best Director for this movie, but of course he went on to win 2 Oscars over the next couple of years after this movie came out. But this was the movie that kind of launched his name into the stratosphere, and it really was something for Emma Thompson too, who had just won an Oscar 2 years prior for writing, 3 years prior, I should say, for writing Howard's End. And she won another Oscar for this movie, except this time she won it for Best Actress. Oh no, Best Adapted Screenplay, I'm sorry. She won the Best Actress for Howard's End back in '92. I just saw that right there when I'm looking at the description here. But they made a pretty good movie. I'm not really one of these people that goes for these period piece movies all that often, but this is a really good one. And like I said, it really launched Ang Lee as into the stratosphere as a director. And it was another great script written by Emma Thompson, who also does a very good job acting-wise in this. Kate Winslet, this was another breakout role for her. Alan Rickman is pretty good in the movie, so is Hugh Grant. There's so many elements about this movie that just work so well. It's a well-made film. It's one of the best Jane Austen adaptations ever, and it's a great movie on so many levels, just from the scope of the film, the visual wonder of it, the writing, the direction, the acting, everything about it just works so well here. And even if you're not a big fan of Jane Austen's work, you can still find a lot to really enjoy about this movie. Like I said, I'm not really a whole lot into Jane Austen's work, but I found a lot to really like about this movie. There is a lot there to admire. I think anybody can go into it and find a lot to really appreciate about it. So that's my thoughts on Sense and Sensibility. Let's move on to the last movie that we have here, and that is Kenneth Branagh's Othello.
The touch of a lover. The point of a dagger. The art of betrayal. Beware, my lord of jealousy. Look to your wife. Observe her well with Cassio. Lawrence Fishburne, Irene Jacob, and Kenneth Branagh. Strangle her in her bed. Othello, rated R. Now playing in selected cities.
Certainly not the first version of Othello to be put onto the big screen, and it would definitely not be the last. Before this movie, Orson Welles made an Othello movie where he started in it, and Laurence Olivier was in one in the 60s. This is the first one since then, and most notably, it's the one that's the first cinematic reproduction of the play released by a major studio that cast an African-American actor in the role of Othello, that of course being Lawrence Fishburne. And there's been other independent versions where Ted Lang and Yaphet Kotto had played him, but this was a pretty big deal. And for Kenneth Branagh, he was at that point where his name was still very much prevalent, and this is directed by. This is not a film that's directed by him. But, Oliver Parker is the one who's directed this. He would later go on to direct stuff like Dorian Gray, St. Trinian's, Johnny English Reborn. Not a lot of notable movies, but a name that you may be very familiar with. And I thought Kenneth Branagh was one of the directors on this, but turns out he's not. He's just playing Iago in here. And he plays Iago very well in here. In fact, the cast overall is what really sells the movie overall. Lawrence Fishburne does a great job playing Othello. Irene Jacob played Desdemona very well. Kenneth Branagh, as I said, is great as Iago. You have Nathaniel Parker in here. Michael Sheen in here. It's a pretty straightforward adaptation of Shakespeare, and it's done pretty well. There's a lot of great things to admire about the movie from the visual level and also the acting level. The story, the story overall is pretty much what you see from the original book, the original poems, I should say. Well, it's a tragedy, okay, maybe not a poem, but you get what I'm talking about. But if you've read Othello, you pretty much get everything you see here. But like I said, it works because of the acting and the visuals. The story, not really all that creative, but it does more than enough to really make this movie pretty enjoyable for what it is. It's a film that I admit I went into it with not a whole lot of expectations for it, but really the performances are what carried it all the way through, and so the visual wonder of the film. It's a really good movie. If you haven't seen Othello, I highly recommend checking it out. It's probably one of the more underrated movies Lawrence Fishburne has ever been attached to. And that's pretty much all I got to say about that one. That's Othello. So that's going to do it for this episode of Time About the Movies. We are heading into a point now where we're going to get to the end of 1995, and there's going to be Box Office Mojo once again doesn't have a complete list of all the movies that came out on a specific weekend, but I can figure it out to kind of split these next two episodes up, because for the 29th of the last week of 1995, only 2 movies on that list, but there's 7 movies prior to that, so I'll cut it up into two parts once again. Next time we'll take a look at the sequel to Grumpy Old Men, Grumpier Old Men. We'll also take a look at Waiting to Exhale, directed by Forrest Whitaker and starring Whitney Houston and Angela Bassett. We'll also take a look at Tom and Huck, the other Huck Finn movie by Disney with Jonathan Taylor Thomas and Brad Renfro. Jean-Claude Van Damme in what I think is his best action movie overall, at least in my opinion, Sudden Death. And then we'll also look at Oliver Stone's Nixon with Anthony Hopkins. So we'll cut that up into next week's episode, the next episode I should say, and then the last episode we do for 95, we'll take a look at the other movies on here, because we still have 12 Monkeys, Dead Man Walking, Balto, Dracula Dead and Loving It, and Cutthroat Island to look at. So we'll split those up. We'll look at the 5 movies I mentioned on the next episode. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for another episode. So thank you for watching, I'll see you next time, and until then, as always, take care.